Maria Santos walked through the hospital corridors like a ghost. Her small frame moved quietly past nurses, doctors, and visitors who barely noticed her presence. At 62 years old, she had mastered the art of being invisible. Her gray uniform blended into the background. Her soft-soled shoes made no sound on the polished floors, and her weathered hands worked efficiently without drawing attention. For 15 years, Maria had cleaned the military wing of San Antonio General Hospital. Every morning at 5 o'clock, she arrived before the sun painted the sky pink. She would change into her uniform, tie her graying hair back into a neat bun, and begin her rounds. Room after room, hallway after hallway, she moved through the hospital like water flowing around stones. The patients in the military wing were different from others. Some were young soldiers recovering from training injuries. Others were veterans dealing with old wounds that refused to heal properly. Many carried invisible scars that no amount of cleaning could wash away. Maria saw them all, though they rarely saw her. She had learned their routines over the years. Private Johnson in room 304 always woke up screaming from nightmares at exactly 3 in the morning. Sergeant Williams in 318 refused to eat the hospital food and survived on crackers his wife brought from home. Captain Rodriguez in 325 spent hours staring out the window, watching birds fly freely in the sky while he remained trapped in his hospital bed. Maria understood their pain in ways that surprised even her. She had come to America from El Salvador 30 years ago, carrying her own invisible wounds. Her husband had died in the Civil War, and she had fled with her young son to build a new life. She knew what it meant to feel lost, scared, and forgotten. But the hospital staff saw none of this depth in Maria. To them, she was simply the cleaning lady. Nurses would talk over her as if she wasn't there, discussing patient information while she mopped nearby. Doctors would step around her without acknowledgement, lost in their important conversations about medical procedures and treatment plans. Administrators would pass her in hallways without making eye contact, their minds focused on budget meetings and policy changes. Maria didn't mind being overlooked. In many ways, it made her job easier. She could observe without being watched, listen without being heard, and help without being noticed. She had developed her own quiet ways of caring for the patients who filled the military wing. When Private Johnson had his nightmares, Maria would quietly slip into his room and adjust his blankets, making sure he was comfortable when he finally fell back asleep. She never woke him, never spoke to him, but her presence somehow seemed to calm his restless spirit. For Sergeant Williams, she would leave small packets of crackers on his bedside table, the kind his wife brought, but in different flavors. She bought them with her own money, hiding them among her cleaning supplies and placing them where he would find them during her late-night rounds. Captain Rodriguez received fresh flowers on his windowsill every few days. Maria would pick wildflowers from the small garden behind the hospital during her lunch breaks, arranging them in empty water cups. She never signed her name or left notes, but she noticed how his face brightened when he discovered the colorful blooms. These small acts of kindness were Maria's secret gifts. She performed them not for recognition or praise, but because she understood what it meant to feel alone and forgotten. Her heart carried the memory of her own dark days, when she had felt invisible and worthless in a country that didn't seem to want her. The other hospital employees had their own stories and struggles, but they rarely shared them with Maria. Sarah, the head nurse on the military wing, was going through a difficult divorce and struggling to raise 2 teenagers alone. Dr. Peterson was dealing with his own father's declining health and felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of caring for others while his own family fell apart. Even the security guards and administrative staff carried burdens that remained hidden beneath their professional uniforms. But Maria saw these struggles too. She noticed when Sarah's eyes were red from crying, and she would leave tissues and a small chocolate bar in the nurse's station break room. She observed Dr. Peterson's exhaustion and would make sure his coffee cup was always full and his workspace was extra clean, creating a small island of order in his chaotic world. Her son, Carlos, often worried about his mother's dedication to her job. He had grown up and become a successful engineer, building the life that Maria had dreamed of when she first arrived in America. He lived in a nice house in the suburbs and had offered many times to support his mother so she could retire and rest. But Maria couldn't imagine leaving the hospital. This place had become more than just her workplace. It was where she found purpose and meaning. The patients needed her, even if they didn't know it. The staff benefited from her care, even if they didn't recognize it. She was the thread that helped hold the military wing together, invisible but essential. Every evening when her shift ended, Maria would walk through the parking lot to the bus stop. She would sit on the bench, waiting for the number 47 bus that would take her home to her small apartment. During these quiet moments, she would reflect on the day, thinking about the patients she had helped and the small ways she had made their difficult journeys a little easier. The apartment where Maria lived was modest but clean. One bedroom, one bathroom, a small kitchen, and a living room that doubled as her personal sanctuary. The walls were decorated with photographs of her son's achievements and a few pictures from her homeland that reminded her of better times before the war changed everything. She would prepare simple meals, usually rice and beans with whatever vegetables were on sale at the local market. While eating, she would watch the news or soap operas, following stories of other people's dramatic lives. But her mind often wandered back to the hospital, wondering how Private Johnson was sleeping or whether Captain Rodriguez had noticed the fresh flowers. On weekends, Maria would visit her son's family. Carlos had married a kind woman named Elena, and they had 2 children who called Maria Abuela. She cherished these visits, playing with her grandchildren and helping Elena prepare traditional meals that connected them all to their cultural roots. But even during these family gatherings, Maria's thoughts would drift to the hospital. She would wonder how the weekend staff was managing, whether they were taking proper care of the military wing patients, and if anyone noticed the small details that made such a difference in recovery and healing. Carlos worried that his mother had no life outside of work. He didn't understand that for Maria, the hospital had become her life's mission. She had found her calling in those quiet corridors, among people who struggled with pain and loss just as she once had. Her work was more than cleaning. It was a form of service that fed her soul. The military wing had its own rhythm and culture. Unlike other parts of the hospital, there was an unspoken understanding among the patients about shared experiences and sacrifices. They might come from different backgrounds and conflicts, but they all understood the weight of service and the challenges of readjusting to civilian life. Maria had learned to read the signs of distress that weren't always obvious to medical staff. She could tell when a patient was having a bad day not just by their words or behavior, but by subtle changes in how they arranged their personal belongings or the way they positioned themselves in their beds. She had also witnessed moments of incredible strength and resilience. Patients who pushed through painful physical therapy sessions, soldiers who supported each other through difficult diagnoses, and families who maintained hope despite overwhelming challenges. These observations had taught Maria valuable lessons about human nature and the power of small gestures. She had seen how a kind word could change someone's entire day, how a moment of genuine attention could provide comfort that no medicine could match, and how feeling seen and valued could accelerate the healing process. Her supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, was a busy woman who managed the cleaning staff for the entire hospital. She appreciated Maria's reliability and work quality, but rarely had time for personal conversations. Their interactions were mostly limited to scheduling discussions and occasional feedback about performance expectations. Mrs. Henderson did notice that the military wing seemed to run more smoothly when Maria was working. Patient complaints were fewer, the nursing staff seemed less stressed, and the overall atmosphere felt more positive. But she attributed this to coincidence rather than recognizing Maria's unique contribution to the ward's success. The hospital administration was always looking for ways to improve patient satisfaction scores and reduce costs. They implemented new policies and procedures regularly, often without understanding the complex dynamics that actually affected patient experiences. They measured success through surveys and statistics, missing the intangible elements that Maria understood instinctively. If they had known about Maria's unofficial contributions to patient care, they might have been surprised by the scope and impact of her work. She was essentially providing therapeutic support without any formal training or recognition. Her natural empathy and cultural understanding of struggle had created a form of healing that complemented the medical treatments patients received. But Maria preferred to work in the shadows. She had learned early in her life that sometimes the most important work happened when no one was watching. Her mother had taught her that service to others was its own reward, and that recognition from people was less important than recognition from God. As weeks turned into months and months into years, Maria's invisible presence had become woven into the fabric of the military wing. Patients who couldn't remember the names of their doctors could describe the way their rooms felt peaceful after the quiet cleaning lady had been there. Nurses who worked double shifts found mysterious energy boosts in the form of perfectly timed cups of coffee and encouraging notes left anonymously on their stations. The ripple effects of Maria's care extended beyond the immediate recipients. Patients who felt supported during their hospital stays recovered with better attitudes. They returned home to their families with more hope and resilience. They rejoined their communities as stronger, more positive individuals who were better equipped to contribute to society. Their family members, seeing their loved ones treated with dignity and compassion, developed more trust in the healthcare system. Children visiting the hospital learned by example that healing environments could be created through small acts of kindness and attention to detail. The military wing had unknowingly become a model for patient care excellence, though the administrators couldn't identify exactly why their satisfaction scores consistently outperformed other departments. They credited new equipment, updated procedures, and improved staffing ratios, never realizing that much of their success could be traced to one invisible woman who understood that healing required more than medical intervention. Maria's story was still unfolding, though neither she nor anyone around her could have predicted how dramatically her quiet life was about to change. The foundation she had built through years of selfless service was creating a legacy that would soon be impossible to ignore. Her simple approach to caring for others was about to intersect with forces much larger than herself. The military wing of the hospital was preparing to receive a visitor whose presence would change everything about how Maria's contributions were perceived and valued. But, for now, she continued her rounds, invisible and essential, touching lives with gentle hands and a servant's heart, unaware that her moment of recognition was approaching like dawn breaking over a horizon she couldn't yet see. General Robert Harrison had not slept well in 3 days. The weight of command pressed heavily on his shoulders as he prepared for what would be one of the most difficult visits of his military career. At 58 years old, he carried the responsibility of overseeing military medical care across the entire southwestern region, a job that required both strategic thinking and deep personal compassion. The general's schedule that Tuesday morning included stops at 3 different medical facilities, but San Antonio General Hospital held special significance. This was where many of the soldiers under his command came for specialized treatment and recovery. It was also where he would have to face some of the hardest conversations a military leader could have, speaking with young men and women whose service had cost them more than anyone should have to give. General Harrison understood sacrifice in ways that few people could comprehend. He had served in multiple combat zones over his 35-year career, rising through the ranks not because he sought power, but because others recognized his genuine care for the soldiers under his command. His chest bore ribbons that told stories of courage, dedication, and loss that had shaped him into the leader he had become. The morning briefing at his headquarters had been particularly sobering. Intelligence reports suggested that casualties from the recent overseas operations would continue arriving at regional hospitals for several weeks. Many would require long-term care, and some would face disabilities that would change their lives forever. General Harrison felt the weight of each name on the casualty reports, knowing that behind every statistic was a family that would never be the same. His aide-de-camp, Major Patricia Collins, had carefully coordinated the hospital visit to maximize the general's time with patients while respecting medical protocols and hospital operations. She had worked with the hospital administration to create a schedule that would allow meaningful interactions without disrupting essential care routines. Major Collins had served with General Harrison for 3 years and had developed deep respect for his leadership style. Unlike some senior officers who maintained emotional distance from the human costs of military operations, General Harrison insisted on personal involvement in the care and recovery of wounded soldiers. These hospital visits were never public relations exercises for him. They were sacred obligations to the men and women who had served under his command. The drive to San Antonio General Hospital took 45 minutes through city traffic that seemed heavier than usual. General Harrison sat in the back seat of the official sedan, reviewing files of patients he would be visiting. Each folder contained medical summaries, service records, and personal information that helped him prepare for individual conversations. Private First Class Timothy Chun, 19 years old from Portland, Oregon, had lost both legs in an improvised explosive device attack while on patrol. His file noted that he was struggling with depression and had been refusing visits from family members. The psychological evaluation suggested that he felt like a burden and was wrestling with questions about his future value and purpose. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, 26 years old from Phoenix, Arizona, had suffered severe burns over 60% of her body during a vehicle explosion. She was facing months of painful skin graft surgeries and rehabilitation. Her file indicated that she was concerned about how her injuries would affect her relationship with her fiancé and her ability to have children. Captain James Washington, 32 years old from Atlanta, Georgia, had sustained traumatic brain injury from blast exposure and was dealing with memory issues and severe headaches. His wife had been staying at the hospital for 2 weeks, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs and trying to help her husband remember basic details about their life together. Each story represented not just an individual tragedy, but a family crisis that would ripple through communities for generations. General Harrison had learned over the years that effective leadership meant acknowledging these human costs honestly, while finding ways to help people discover meaning and hope despite devastating circumstances. The hospital's main entrance bustled with activity as staff members prepared for the general's arrival. Hospital Administrator Dr. Patricia Whitman had coordinated with security personnel to ensure smooth logistics while maintaining normal operations for other patients and visitors. She understood the importance of these visits for both the patients and the broader military community. Dr. Whitman had worked in military medicine for 15 years before transitioning to civilian hospital administration. She recognized that visits from senior leaders could provide incredible morale boosts for recovering soldiers, but they also required careful management to avoid overwhelming patients who were dealing with physical and emotional trauma. The hospital's public relations team had prepared brief statements for local media, but General Harrison had specifically requested minimal publicity. His focus was on the soldiers and their families, not on generating positive coverage for the military or the hospital. He had learned that authentic connection required privacy and genuine attention rather than performed concern for cameras. As the official sedan pulled into the hospital parking area, General Harrison mentally prepared himself for the emotional challenges ahead. Each visit reminded him of the profound responsibilities that came with military leadership and the trust that young soldiers placed in their commanders when they followed orders that could cost them everything. The military wing of San Antonio General Hospital had been specially designed to meet the unique needs of service members and veterans. The layout provided extra space for family members, specialized equipment for combat-related injuries, and therapeutic areas designed to support both physical and psychological recovery. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the chief medical officer for the military wing, had worked extensively with combat casualties and understood the complex interplay between physical healing and emotional recovery. She had briefed General Harrison's staff about each patient's condition, prognosis, and current state of mind to help him prepare for meaningful conversations. The nursing staff had mixed feelings about high-level visits. While they appreciated the recognition and support that senior leaders provided, they also worried about disrupting carefully established routines that supported patient recovery. Head nurse Sarah Martinez had worked extra shifts to ensure that her team was prepared to facilitate the visit while maintaining optimal patient care. Sarah had been dealing with her own personal challenges, but she pushed them aside to focus on professional responsibilities. Her divorce proceedings were creating financial stress, and her teenage daughter was struggling in school, but she compartmentalized these concerns to concentrate on her patient's needs during this important day. The security preparations for General Harrison's visit had been extensive but discreet. Hospital security worked with military police to create safe corridors and secure areas without creating an atmosphere that felt restrictive or intimidating for other patients and families. Their goal was to protect the general while preserving the healing environment that patients required. General Harrison arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, accompanied by Major Collins and 2 security personnel. He wore his dress uniform with full decorations, understanding that the visual symbols of rank and honor could provide comfort and validation for soldiers who had made significant sacrifices for their country. The hospital's executive team greeted the general at the main entrance, but he quickly requested to move directly to the military wing. He preferred to spend his limited time with patients and their families rather than in administrative meetings or ceremonial activities. This approach reflected his leadership philosophy of prioritizing substance over symbolism. As they walked through the hospital corridors toward the military wing, General Harrison noticed the quiet efficiency of the staff and the clean, professional environment. He had visited many medical facilities over his career and had learned to assess institutional culture through observation of details that others might miss. The first stop was Private Chen's room, where the young soldier was staring at the ceiling with an expression of profound despair. His parents had flown in from Oregon, but were staying in a nearby hotel because their son had asked them to leave him alone. The psychological weight of his injuries seemed even heavier than the physical challenges he faced. General Harrison entered the room quietly, asking permission to sit down rather than using his rank to command attention. He understood that wounded soldiers needed to maintain as much control as possible over their environment and interactions. His approach was respectful, patient, and focused on listening rather than delivering speeches about honor and sacrifice. The conversation with Private Chen lasted nearly 20 minutes. General Harrison shared his own experiences with loss and adaptation, spoke about soldiers he had known who had built meaningful lives despite severe disabilities, and listened as the young man expressed fears about becoming a burden to his family and society. By the end of their conversation, Private Chen had agreed to see his parents that afternoon. General Harrison didn't promise that everything would be easy, but he helped the soldier understand that his value as a person extended beyond his physical capabilities and that his future could still hold purpose and joy despite the dramatic changes he would have to navigate. The visit with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez presented different challenges. Her pain medication made concentration difficult, and her concerns about her appearance and future relationships required delicate handling. General Harrison brought a message from her commanding officer and fellow soldiers, emphasizing that her courage under fire had saved lives and that her military family would support her through the long recovery process. Her fiancé had been struggling with his own emotions about the relationship changes they would face together. General Harrison spoke with both of them about the strength required for long-term commitment and the ways that shared challenges could deepen rather than threaten their bond. Captain Washington's visit was complicated by his memory issues and cognitive difficulties. His wife had been maintaining a brave front, but the emotional strain was evident in her exhausted appearance and nervous energy. General Harrison spent time with both of them, acknowledging the unique challenges they faced while connecting them with resources for ongoing support. Each interaction required General Harrison to balance his roles as military leader, compassionate human being, and symbol of institutional support. He drew on decades of experience dealing with combat casualties, personal loss, and the complex emotions that accompanied military service during wartime. The hospital staff watched these interactions with professional interest and personal emotion. Many had served in the military themselves or had family members in service. They understood the significance of having a senior leader demonstrate personal investment in individual soldiers' welfare and recovery. Between patient visits, General Harrison met briefly with medical staff to discuss treatment protocols, resource needs, and systemic issues that affected military medical care. He took notes on suggestions for policy improvements and identified areas where his influence could help address gaps in services or support. Dr. Morrison briefed him on research initiatives that could benefit future casualties, funding needs for specialized equipment, and training programs that would improve care quality. General Harrison appreciated the opportunity to understand the clinical side of military medicine and to identify ways that his leadership position could support innovations in treatment and recovery. The morning schedule included 6 individual patient visits, each requiring careful attention to unique circumstances and needs. General Harrison approached each conversation with fresh energy and genuine interest, understanding that these interactions could provide crucial psychological support during vulnerable periods in these soldiers' lives. As the morning progressed, hospital staff began to recognize something special about General Harrison's approach to these visits. Unlike other senior leaders who had visited the facility, he seemed genuinely engaged with each person as an individual rather than as representatives of broader categories or political talking points. His questions were specific and personal. He remembered details from their service records and asked about families, home communities, and personal interests that existed beyond their military identities. This approach helped patients reconnect with aspects of themselves that extended beyond their current medical challenges. The ripple effects of these conversations would continue long after General Harrison left the hospital. Patients would remember feeling valued and seen by someone in authority. Family members would feel that their sacrifices were recognized and honored. Hospital staff would be reminded of the human significance of their professional work. But none of them could have anticipated that the most profound moment of the day was still ahead, involving someone who had been present throughout the morning but remained completely invisible to everyone involved in the official visit. Maria Santos had continued her regular cleaning duties during the general's visit, working quietly around the increased activity and security presence. She had observed the conversations from a distance, seen the emotional connections being made, and felt proud of the way her patients were being treated with dignity and respect. The stage was being set for an encounter that would change how everyone understood the true nature of service, sacrifice, and recognition in ways that no one could have predicted. Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway, moving with the same quiet efficiency that had defined her work for 15 years. The military wing buzzed with unusual activity as General Harrison continued his patient visits, but Maria maintained her routine, understanding that consistency was especially important during times of change and excitement. She had been working around the increased security and administrative activity all morning, adapting her schedule to accommodate the VIP visit while ensuring that patient care areas remained clean and organized. Her years of experience had taught her how to be flexible without compromising the standards that patients deserved. As she worked, Maria couldn't help but observe the interactions between General Harrison and the patients she had come to know so well. She watched from a respectful distance as he spent genuine time with Private Shun, saw the way Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's face brighten during their conversation, and noticed how Captain Washington seemed more alert and engaged than he had been in days. These observations filled Maria with quiet satisfaction. She had been providing her own form of care for these same patients, and seeing them receive recognition and support from such a distinguished leader felt like validation of their worth and sacrifice. She had always believed they deserved respect and attention, and now someone with real authority was demonstrating that same conviction. The morning's patient visits had gone longer than scheduled, which meant that General Harrison's staff was beginning to adjust the timeline for the remainder of his day. Major Collins checked her watch frequently, balancing her responsibility to maintain the general's schedule against his clear desire to give each patient the time they needed. Dr. Whitman had been impressed by General Harrison's approach to the visits. Unlike some VIPs who rushed through obligatory appearances, he seemed genuinely invested in each conversation and unwilling to cut interactions short for the sake of efficiency. This dedication to personal connection was exactly what the patients needed, even if it complicated logistical planning. As the morning progressed toward lunchtime, Maria found herself cleaning the hallway outside Captain Washington's room just as General Harrison was concluding his visit with the brain-injured soldier and his wife. She worked quietly, organizing her supplies and preparing to move to the next area on her route. The conversation inside the room was winding down, with General Harrison providing his personal contact information to Captain Washington's wife and promising to follow up on specific support services that might help with their long-term recovery challenges. The emotional weight of the visit was evident in all three participants, but there was also a sense of hope and connection that hadn't existed before. As General Harrison prepared to leave Captain Washington's room, something unexpected happened. Captain Washington, whose memory issues had made conversation difficult throughout the morning, suddenly spoke with perfect clarity and focus. "General, sir," Captain Washington said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "I need to tell you something important about this hospital." General Harrison stopped immediately, turning back toward the bed with full attention. Major Collins and the medical staff who had been preparing to move to the next scheduled stop also paused, surprised by the soldier's sudden alertness and sense of urgency. "What is it, Captain?" General Harrison asked, returning to the bedside with genuine interest. Captain Washington struggled to find the right words, his wife encouraging him with gentle touches and supportive looks. The brain injury made it difficult for him to organize complex thoughts, but he seemed determined to communicate something that felt crucial to him. "There's someone here," Captain Washington began slowly. "Someone who takes care of us in ways that nobody sees. She makes this place feel like home when we're scared and hurt. She's the reason we can heal." General Harrison exchanged glances with Major Collins and the hospital staff, uncertain about what the captain was trying to communicate. Brain injuries could cause confusion and difficulty distinguishing between reality and imagination, so they listened carefully while remaining appropriately skeptical. "Who are you referring to, Captain?" Dr. Morrison asked gently, her medical training making her cautious about reinforcing potentially confused thinking. Captain Washington's wife squeezed his hand encouragingly. She had spent enough time at the hospital to understand what her husband was trying to express, and She nodded for him to continue. "The cleaning lady," Captain Washington said, his eyes growing clearer as he focused on the memory. "She's not just a cleaning lady. She takes care of all of us. She knows when we're having bad days. She knows what we need before we know it ourselves." As if summoned by their conversation, Maria appeared in the doorway, having finished organizing her supplies in the hallway. She had heard voices and wanted to ensure that her presence wasn't disrupting the important visit. She stood quietly at the threshold, uncertain whether to continue with her work or wait until the room was clear. General Harrison noticed her immediately. His trained military eye took in her simple gray uniform, her careful posture, and the way she waited respectfully without drawing attention to herself. Something about her presence commanded respect, though he couldn't initially articulate why. "Are you the cleaning lady Captain Washington was referring to?" General Harrison asked, his voice carrying the authority of command, but also genuine curiosity and respect. Maria nodded quietly, unsure how to respond to direct attention from such a high-ranking military officer. She had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility, and suddenly, finding herself the center of focus felt overwhelming and uncomfortable. "Yes, sir," she said softly, her accented English clear but hesitant. "I cleaned the rooms and halls." Captain Washington became more animated, his memory issues seeming to clear as he focused on describing Maria's impact on his recovery experience. "She brings flowers from my window," he said, pointing toward the small wildflower arrangement that Maria had placed there 2 days earlier. "She makes sure I have extra pillows when my head hurts. She knows exactly when I need things, but she never makes me feel like I can't take care of myself." General Harrison looked toward the window where a simple but beautiful arrangement of local wildflowers brightened the sterile hospital environment. The flowers were clearly not part of any official hospital program, suggesting personal attention and care that went beyond professional obligations. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been listening from the neighboring room, called out through the thin walls that separated the patient areas. "General Harrison, she's talking about Maria," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez said, her voice carrying excitement and gratitude. "She's been taking care of all of us. She leaves little things in our rooms that help us feel human again." Dr. Morrison and the nursing staff exchanged surprised looks. They had noticed that patient satisfaction and recovery rates were consistently higher in areas where Maria worked, but they had attributed this to coincidence rather than recognizing her specific contributions to patient care. General Harrison stepped closer to Maria, his experienced eyes reading the character and dignity that her humble appearance couldn't hide. He had learned over decades of military service to recognize quality and dedication in unexpected places, and something about this quiet woman commanded his immediate respect. "How long have you been working here?" he asked, his tone shifting to reflect growing interest and appreciation. 15 years, sir," Maria replied, still uncertain about the attention she was receiving. "I try to help the soldiers feel comfortable while they get better." "She does more than that," Captain Washington's wife interjected, speaking for the first time during the exchange. "She's the reason this place feels healing instead of just medical. She sees our husbands as people, not just patients." Private Chun had wheeled himself into the hallway in his wheelchair, drawn by the unusual conversation. Despite his recent depression and withdrawal, he felt compelled to add his voice to the growing testimony about Maria's impact. "She saved my life," Private Chun said quietly, his words carrying profound weight. "Not medically, but in every other way that matters. She helped me remember that I'm still worth something, even like this." The hallway was beginning to fill with patients, family members, and staff who had heard about the unusual conversation taking place. Word was spreading quickly through the military wing that something significant was happening, though no one was quite certain what it meant. General Harrison found himself facing a situation that his military training hadn't specifically prepared him for. Here was a woman whose service and sacrifice had clearly been extraordinary, yet she had received no recognition, no official acknowledgement, and no understanding of her true impact on the mission of healing and recovery. His military mind began processing the information he was receiving. If Captain Washington's assessment was accurate, and if the other patients confirmed similar experiences, then Maria's contributions to patient care and recovery represented exactly the kind of excellence and dedication that the military honored through its recognition systems. But Maria wasn't a soldier. She wasn't part of the military hierarchy. She was a civilian employee whose service had military significance, but fell outside traditional categories for official recognition. General Harrison found himself in uncharted territory, trying to determine how to respond appropriately to exceptional service that didn't fit standard protocols. Major Collins watched her commanding officer process this unexpected situation. She could see his mind working through the implications and possibilities, recognizing that this moment required leadership and judgment that went beyond routine procedures. Dr. Whitman and the hospital administration staff were also grappling with the realization that one of their employees had been providing patient care services that extended far beyond her job description. The patient's testimony suggested that Maria had essentially been functioning as an unofficial therapist, chaplain, and advocate without any formal training or authorization. From a liability perspective, this situation raised questions about appropriate boundaries and professional responsibilities. But, from a human perspective, it was clear that Maria's contributions had been overwhelmingly positive and had supported the hospital's mission in ways that formal programs hadn't achieved. Maria stood in the center of this growing attention, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the focus on her personal actions. She had never sought recognition for her work and didn't understand why her simple acts of kindness were being discussed as if they were extraordinary achievements. "I just do what anyone would do," she said quietly, trying to deflect the praise and return to her normal routine. "These soldiers have given so much for our country. The least I can do is make sure their rooms are clean and they feel cared for." But General Harrison was beginning to understand that what Maria considered what anyone would do was actually something that very few people actually did. Her consistent, dedicated service over 15 years represented exactly the kind of commitment to mission and care for fellow human beings that the military sought to cultivate in its own personnel. The moment was building toward something unprecedented. General Harrison felt the weight of decision, understanding that his response to this situation would send messages about values, recognition, and the true meaning of service that would ripple far beyond this single hospital corridor. The stage was set for an action that would transform not just Maria's life, but the understanding of everyone present about the many forms that heroism and sacrifice could take. General Harrison stood in the hospital hallway, surrounded by patients, families, and staff, facing a moment that would define his understanding of service and sacrifice. The testimonies he had heard about Maria Santos challenged everything he thought he knew about recognition, duty, and the many ways that people could serve their country and fellow citizens. As he looked at Maria, still standing quietly with her cleaning cart, still trying to deflect attention from her extraordinary contributions, General Harrison made a decision that surprised everyone present, including himself. Slowly, deliberately, with the precision and dignity that 35 years of military service had ingrained in every movement, General Harrison came to attention. His posture straightened, his shoulders squared, and his right hand moved to his forehead in the crisp, formal salute that represented the highest form of military respect and recognition. The hallway fell completely silent. Patients stopped moving. Nurses paused in their conversations. Family members held their breath. Even the background sounds of the hospital seemed to fade as everyone processed what they were witnessing. Maria Santos, the invisible cleaning lady who had spent 15 years caring for others without recognition or reward, was receiving a formal military salute from a four-star general. Maria's eyes widened in confusion and disbelief. She had no understanding of military protocol or hierarchy, but she recognized that something profound and unprecedented was happening. Her instinct was to look away, to step aside, to return to the shadows where she felt safe and comfortable. But General Harrison held his salute, his eyes fixed on hers with unwavering respect and recognition. He understood that this moment required more than words or casual acknowledgement. Maria's service had military significance, and it deserved military recognition. "Ma'am," General Harrison said, his voice carrying the formal authority of official recognition, "I salute your service to these soldiers and to our nation. Your dedication and sacrifice have supported our military mission in ways that deserve the highest respect and honor." The impact of these words rippled through everyone present. Patients who had struggled with feelings of worthlessness and invisibility saw their own value reflected in the recognition being given to someone who had cared for them. Staff members who had overlooked Maria's contributions began to understand the depth and significance of what they had missed. Captain Washington struggled to sit up straighter in his wheelchair, emotion overwhelming his usual difficulties with focus and expression. "General, sir," he said, his voice breaking with feeling. "She's been our guardian angel. She made us believe we were still worth caring about when we couldn't see it ourselves." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had tears streaming down her face, thinking about all the moments when Maria's quiet presence had provided comfort during her darkest hours of pain and fear. "She never asked for anything," she whispered. "She just gave and gave and gave." Private Chin wheeled his chair closer, looking directly at Maria for the first time since he had arrived at the hospital. "You helped me want to live again," he said simply. "When I thought I was nothing but a burden, you treated me like I mattered." General Harrison finally lowered his salute, but his attention remained focused on Maria. He could see the overwhelming emotion in her eyes and understood that this recognition was as shocking to her as it was meaningful to everyone else present. "Maria," he said, using her first name with gentle respect, "what you have done here represents the best of what service means. You've served these soldiers, their families, and your country with dedication that goes far beyond any job description or official duty." Maria struggled to find words to respond. Her English, usually adequate for her daily interactions, seemed insufficient for expressing the complex emotions she was experiencing. She had never imagined that her simple acts of kindness could be seen as significant service worthy of military recognition. I just wanted to help them feel better," she said quietly, her voice shaking with emotion. "They are so far from home, so scared and hurt. I remember what it feels like to be alone in a place where nobody sees you." Her words revealed the depth of understanding that had motivated her service. She had drawn on her own experiences of invisibility and isolation to recognize and address those same feelings in the patients she served. Her empathy wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal and rooted in shared human experience. Dr. Morrison stepped forward, realizing that as the chief medical officer for the military wing, she needed to acknowledge what had been happening under her supervision without her awareness. "General Harrison," she said formally, "I must admit that we had not fully recognized the scope and impact of Maria's contributions to patient care. The testimonies we're hearing today illuminate services that complemented our medical treatments in ways that our formal assessments hadn't captured." General Harrison nodded, understanding the complexities that medical administrators faced in balancing protocols with individual initiative. But he also recognized that this situation revealed gaps in how institutions measured and valued different forms of contribution to their missions. Major Collins had been observing the entire interaction with professional fascination and personal emotion. As someone responsible for military protocol and recognition procedures, she was witnessing an unprecedented situation that challenged conventional approaches to honoring service and sacrifice. The patients, families, and staff who had gathered in the hallway were all processing their own reactions to what they had witnessed. For many, it was the first time they had seen someone like them. A humble worker performing unglamorous duties received formal recognition from the highest levels of authority. Hospital Administrator Dr. Whitman recognized that this moment would have lasting implications for how the institution understood and valued all forms of service that contributed to patient care and recovery. Maria's story revealed possibilities for recognizing and supporting excellence that extended far beyond traditional professional categories. But the immediate impact was most visible in the patients themselves. Private Chin sat straighter in his wheelchair, his depression momentarily lifted by seeing someone who had cared for him receive honor and recognition. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez smiled through her tears, feeling validated in her own struggles by the acknowledgement of someone who had supported her healing. Captain Washington's cognitive clarity seemed enhanced by the emotional significance of the moment. His wife squeezed his hand, both of them understanding that they had witnessed something that transcended normal hospital experiences and connected to deeper truths about human dignity and service. General Harrison understood that this moment required follow-through beyond the immediate recognition. He turned to Major Collins and Dr. Whitman, his mind already working on ways to ensure that Maria's contributions could be formally acknowledged and that other similar services could be identified and supported. "Major Collins," he said with the tone of official instruction, "I want you to coordinate with the hospital administration to document Maria's service contributions and explore appropriate forms of formal recognition. What we've learned here today needs to be preserved and honored properly." He then addressed Dr. Whitman directly. "Doctor, I hope this experience will encourage your institution to look more carefully at all the ways that healing and recovery are supported in your facility. Maria's work represents a model that other hospitals could learn from. But General Harrison wasn't finished with his immediate response to the situation. He reached into his uniform jacket and removed one of his personal challenge coins, special recognition tokens that military leaders carried to acknowledge exceptional service and achievement. Challenge coins held deep significance in military culture. They represented personal recognition from senior leaders and were treasured by recipients as symbols of respect and appreciation. General Harrison rarely gave his personal coins to anyone, reserving them for truly extraordinary circumstances. He stepped toward Maria and placed the coin in her hands. "This represents my personal recognition of your service," he said solemnly. "You've earned the respect of everyone in this room and everyone who has benefited from your care." Maria looked down at the heavy metal coin in her hands, studying the intricate design that represented General Harrison's command and authority. She didn't fully understand the military significance of what she had received, but she could feel the weight of meaning it carried. "Thank you," she whispered, the inadequacy of words making her feel frustrated and grateful at the same time. "Thank you for seeing us. For seeing them." She gestured toward the patients who had been watching the entire interaction with rapt attention. The hallway erupted in spontaneous applause from patients, families, and staff who had been witnessing this unprecedented recognition. The sound echoed through the military wing, drawing the attention of people in nearby areas who wondered what could be causing such celebration in a place typically associated with pain and struggle. But even as the applause continued, General Harrison's mind was already working on the broader implications of what had occurred. This moment had revealed systemic issues about how service was recognized and valued, both within military institutions and in the civilian organizations that supported military personnel. He was beginning to understand that Maria's story represented more than individual excellence. It highlighted the many forms of service that supported military missions but fell outside traditional recognition systems. It also demonstrated the power of personal attention and care and healing processes that went far beyond medical intervention. The immediate celebration gradually quieted as people began to process the full significance of what they had witnessed. This wasn't just a feel-good moment or a publicity gesture. It was a recognition that challenged assumptions about who deserved honor, what constituted service, and how institutions should identify and support excellence in all its forms. Maria stood in the center of the attention, still holding the challenge coin, still struggling to understand how her simple acts of kindness had led to this overwhelming moment of recognition. She was beginning to realize that her life was about to change in ways that she couldn't yet comprehend. The patients who had benefited from her care were seeing their own experiences validated through the honor being given to someone who had served them. The hospital staff were reconsidering their own understanding of patient care and the many factors that contributed to healing and recovery. General Harrison knew that this moment would be remembered and discussed long after he left the hospital. But he also knew that the real measure of its significance would be determined by what happened next, how institutions and individuals responded to the lessons that Maria's story had revealed. The stage was set for changes that would extend far beyond one hospital, one woman, or one moment of recognition. Maria Santos had unknowingly become a catalyst for broader conversations about service, sacrifice, and the many ways that ordinary people could make extraordinary contributions to causes larger than themselves. The news of General Harrison's salute to Maria Santos spread through the hospital like wildfire, then beyond its walls into the community, and eventually across the nation. Within hours, local television stations were calling the hospital requesting interviews. Social media posts sharing the story gained thousands of views and comments. The image of a four-star general saluting a humble cleaning lady struck a chord that resonated far beyond anyone's expectations. But for Maria herself, the immediate aftermath was overwhelming and confusing. She had finished her shift that Tuesday in a daze, still clutching General Harrison's challenge coin and trying to process what had happened. Her supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, had found her sitting in the break room long after her scheduled departure time, staring at the coin with tears in her eyes. "Maria," Mrs. Henderson had said gently, "are you okay? I heard about what happened with the general." Maria looked up with an expression that mixed gratitude, confusion, and exhaustion. "I don't understand why everyone is making such a big deal," she said quietly. "I just did my job. I just tried to be kind." Mrs. Henderson sat down beside her longtime employee, seeing Maria clearly for perhaps the first time in all their years of working together. "Maybe that's exactly why it matters so much," she said. "Because you didn't do it for recognition or attention. You did it because it was the right thing to do." The ride home on the number 47 bus was different that evening. Maria noticed that other passengers seemed to be looking at her, though she couldn't be sure if it was real or just her heightened awareness after the day's events. She kept the challenge coin tucked safely in her purse, occasionally touching it to confirm that the whole experience hadn't been a dream. When she reached her apartment, Maria called her son Carlos to tell him what had happened. Carlos had been at work during the day and hadn't heard the news, so Maria's description of the morning's events came as a complete shock. "Mom, are you serious?" Carlos asked, barely able to believe what he was hearing. "A general saluted you? In front of everyone." Maria tried to explain, but found herself struggling to convey the significance of the moment. "He said I was serving the soldiers," she told her son. "He said what I did mattered for the country." Carlos felt a complex mix of emotions: pride, vindication, and regret. For years, he had worried that his mother was wasting her life in a job that didn't appreciate her intelligence and capabilities. Now, suddenly, she was being recognized at the highest levels for exactly the qualities he had always admired in her but had never thought others would see. The next morning, Maria arrived at work to find a crowd of reporters and camera crews gathered outside the hospital's main entrance. Security guards were redirecting them away from patient areas, but their presence created an atmosphere of excitement and chaos that felt foreign to the usually calm medical environment. Dr. Whitman intercepted Maria before she could reach the employee entrance, guiding her through a side door to avoid the media attention. "Maria," she said, "we need to talk about how to handle all this attention. The story has gotten much bigger than any of us expected." The hospital administrator had spent the previous evening fielding calls from journalists, television producers, and various organizations wanting to know more about Maria's story. Local veterans groups were asking about honoring her service. National magazines were requesting feature interviews. The mayor's office had called about potential civic recognition ceremonies. "I don't want all this attention," Maria told Dr. Whitman honestly. "I just want to take care of my patients and do my work." Dr. Whitman understood Maria's discomfort, but she also recognized that this situation had created opportunities and obligations that couldn't simply be ignored. "I know this is overwhelming," she said, "but your story has touched people in ways that could help other veterans and healthcare workers. We need to find a way to manage this responsibly." Throughout that week, the impact of the story continued to grow. Veterans organizations across the country began sharing their own stories of civilian employees who had gone above and beyond to support military personnel. Other hospitals started examining their own practices and looking for unrecognized contributors to patient care and recovery. The patients in the military wing became unexpected celebrities themselves, as reporters sought interviews with the soldiers who had testified about Maria's impact on their recovery. Private Chun, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, and Captain Washington found themselves speaking publicly about their experiences and the importance of compassionate care and healing. These interviews revealed deeper truths about the challenges facing wounded veterans and the gaps in support systems that people like Maria had been quietly filling. Mental health advocates used the story to highlight the importance of emotional and psychological support in medical recovery. Private Chun, whose depression had been so severe just days earlier, discovered that sharing his story publicly gave him a sense of purpose and connection that contributed significantly to his healing process. Speaking about Maria's impact helped him articulate his own value and potential for recovery. "She saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself," he told a national television interviewer. "When a 4-star general salutes the person who believed in you, it makes you believe in yourself too." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez used her media appearances to advocate for better burn treatment facilities and support systems for soldiers dealing with disfiguring injuries. Her confidence in speaking publicly seemed to grow each day, partly inspired by Maria's example of quiet strength and service. Captain Washington's cognitive improvements appeared to accelerate following the recognition ceremony. His doctors couldn't establish a direct medical connection, but his wife and family noticed marked improvements in his memory, focus, and emotional stability. General Harrison found himself inundated with interview requests and speaking opportunities related to the story. Initially, he was reluctant to participate in what he saw as potentially exploitative media attention. But, as he reflected on the broader implications of Maria's recognition, he began to see opportunities to address larger issues about military culture, civilian support, and recognition systems. In a carefully planned press conference at his headquarters, General Harrison addressed the national attention that the story had generated. Maria Santos represents thousands of civilians who support our military mission in ways that often go unnoticed, he said. Her recognition should remind us to look more carefully at all the people who contribute to our success and our soldiers' welfare. He announced the establishment of a new recognition program for civilian employees who provided exceptional support to military personnel. The Maria Santos Award for Civilian Service Excellence would be presented annually to individuals whose contributions went above and beyond their formal job responsibilities to support military missions and personnel. The military services began reviewing their recognition policies to identify other civilians whose contributions deserved formal acknowledgement. This led to the discovery of many individuals whose service had been invisible but essential, from Family Readiness Group volunteers to Department of Veterans Affairs employees who had provided extraordinary patient advocacy. Back at San Antonio General Hospital, the administration was implementing changes based on lessons learned from Maria's story. They established new protocols for identifying and supporting employees who contributed to patient care in ways that extended beyond their formal job descriptions. A patient advocacy program was created, with Maria as its first official coordinator. Despite her initial reluctance to accept increased responsibilities, she agreed to help develop training programs for other employees interested in providing enhanced patient support services. The wildflower gardens behind the hospital were expanded and formalized, with Maria leading efforts to create therapeutic outdoor spaces where patients and families could find peace and beauty during difficult times. Her informal flower arrangements had evolved into a recognized hospital program that other medical facilities began requesting guidance to replicate. Maria's son Carlos took leave from his engineering job to help his mother navigate the unexpected attention and opportunities that had emerged from her recognition. He served as her informal agent and advisor, helping her evaluate speaking requests, interview opportunities, and various honors that organizations wanted to bestow upon her. "Mom," he told her during one of their planning sessions, "you have a chance to help a lot of people understand what real service looks like. Maybe this attention isn't about you. Maybe it's about the message you can share." This perspective helped Maria begin to see the media attention and recognition opportunities as extensions of her service rather than personal aggrandizement. She started accepting selected speaking engagements, focusing on audiences of healthcare workers, veterans organizations, and community service groups. Her speeches were simple and heartfelt, emphasizing the power of small acts of kindness and the importance of seeing others as complete human beings worthy of dignity and respect. She spoke in both English and Spanish, reaching diverse audiences with messages about compassion, service, and recognition. The challenge coin that General Harrison had given Maria became a powerful symbol in her presentations. She would hold it up and explain that while she treasured the recognition it represented, the real reward had always been the relationships she had built with patients and the knowledge that her work made a difference in their lives. Educational institutions began inviting Maria to speak to students about career choices, service opportunities, and the many ways that individuals could contribute meaningfully to their communities. Her message resonated particularly strongly with first-generation immigrants and working-class students who saw their own possibilities reflected in her story. The story's impact on military culture was profound and lasting. Training programs for military leaders began, including discussions about recognizing and supporting all forms of service that contributed to mission success. The example of General Harrison's salute became a case study in leadership, recognition, and the importance of seeing value in unexpected places. Veterans hospitals across the country began implementing programs modeled on Maria's approach to patient care. The Maria Santos model emphasized personal attention, environmental enhancement, and emotional support as essential components of medical treatment for service members. Research studies were initiated to quantify the impact of environmental and emotional factors on recovery rates for military patients. Early results suggested that patients who received the kind of comprehensive care that Maria had been providing informally showed measurably better outcomes in both physical recovery and psychological adjustment. The story also sparked broader conversations about recognition and appreciation in civilian workplaces. Companies and organizations began examining their own practices for identifying and honoring employees whose contributions extended beyond formal job requirements. Labor unions used Maria's story to advocate for better recognition and compensation for service workers who contributed to organizational success in ways that traditional metrics didn't capture. Her example provided a powerful illustration of how essential work could be undervalued and overlooked. Immigration advocates highlighted Maria's story as an example of the contributions that immigrants made to American society, often without recognition or appreciation. Her journey from refugee to honored service provider illustrated the potential for positive impact when people were given opportunities to contribute their skills and compassion. A year after General Harrison's salute, Maria found herself invited to the White House to receive a Presidential Citizen's Medal for her service to veterans and her contribution to improving military health care. The ceremony brought together the patients she had served, the hospital staff who had learned from her example, and military leaders who had implemented changes inspired by her recognition. Standing in the Rose Garden, wearing a simple blue dress that her daughter-in-law had helped her select, Maria Santos reflected on the journey that had brought her from invisibility to national recognition. The little girl who had fled war-torn El Salvador, the young widow who had arrived in America with nothing but hope, had somehow become a symbol of service and compassion that inspired others across the country. In her acceptance speech, Maria returned to the themes that had always motivated her work. "I learned long ago that everyone needs to feel seen and valued," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "When we serve others with our whole hearts, when we treat them with dignity and respect, we help heal more than just their physical wounds. We help heal their spirits and remind them that they matter." The ceremony concluded with a surprise appearance by General Harrison, who had requested permission to attend and witness this culmination of the recognition that had begun with his simple salute in a hospital hallway. As Maria received her medal from the president, General Harrison stood at attention once again, his respect for her service as profound as it had been that transformative morning when everything changed. The ripples of recognition that had begun with one moment of acknowledgement had spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined, touching lives and changing systems in ways that would continue for years to come. Maria Santos had indeed gone unnoticed for many years, but when a four-star general finally stopped in his tracks to salute her, the whole world took notice of what quiet service and genuine compassion could accomplish.